Hi, good evening. Thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Ryan Flores. I'm the Technical Services Manager at the Westchester Public Library. And with us this evening, we're happy to present Justin Brown from the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago, where he works as a public affairs specialist. Justin's work as a photographer, drone pilot, and public outreach professional takes him to projects and facilities throughout the MWRD's 883 square mile service area, providing him with a wide perspective on the agency and the communities it serves. So Justin, I'm going to get off and thank you for this virtual tour of the MWRD.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm Justin. I'm a public affairs specialist at the MWRD, or Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago, which is a government agency responsible for treating wastewater and managing stormwater for the Chicago region. So that means cleaning sewage and working to reduce flooding in the area. We were founded in 1883 to reverse the flow of the Chicago River. And in a minute, I'll show you how that was done and maybe more importantly, why it was necessary to do that. Now, even though we have the word water in our name, one thing we're not responsible for is our region's water supply. For most people in our service area, their water supply comes from the City of Chicago's Department of Water Management. So we were founded to reverse the river. Today we have 7 wastewater treatment plants, including our beautiful Egan plant in Schaumburg, where I am now. We have hundreds of miles of sewers, and we have a system of gigantic tunnels, hundreds of feet underground, that flow into huge reservoirs that are designed to protect our rivers from sewer overflows. So I'm going to show you all that and more, actually. One of my job duties here, besides giving tours, is to shoot photos and videos. So I'm going to be showing you stuff that I've seen firsthand. We'll see some views from the air, shot from helicopters and drones, from ground level, both on land, also out on the river on our boats. I'll take you through our wastewater treatment process, like what happens here in our Egan plant. And you'll see firsthand how we clean an average of 1.5 billion gallons of sewage a day. And that'll include some underwater and microscopic views of that process. Then we're going to go 300 feet underground, and I'll show you around the deep tunnel system. We'll see how it was built, and we'll get to see it in operation. After that, we'll come back up to the surface, and if I've talked fast enough, we will join our biologists on the river for some electrofishing, and you'll see our biological monitoring program at work. Finally, to round things out, I will show you a huge explosion of 36,000 tons of limestone getting blasted out at one of our huge reservoir projects. So let's get started on our tour here. Chicago, of course, sits on the shore of Lake Michigan. We're going to go 40 miles north of Chicago, though, to Illinois Beach State Park, which is right here. And this is an interesting place to visit because historians say that the landscape here is very similar to the way the landscape originally was in the Chicago region. So there's a little river running through the park, and this is kind of the closest thing we have to a time machine to be able to go back and see what the original Chicago River looked like. So while we're here, I want you to notice a couple things about this river. First of all, notice that the top surface of the water is at a similar elevation to the surrounding landscape. So when it rains, this river spreads out and it floods a wide area. Second, notice that the banks of the river are not very well defined. You can see there's grasses growing kind of out into the river, or maybe the river is extending out into these grasses. There's not a clear dividing line between the river and the land. Now, if we look at the Chicago River today, we're on the main stem downtown. It's way different. The banks are now super well defined. In fact, there are even buildings like the Wrigley building here built right up to the edge of the water. The river is also wider and deeper, And the top surface of the water is now well below the elevation of the surrounding landscape. There's one more thing that's important that you can't tell just by looking at it, and that is that the flow of the river has been reversed. So today it flows away from the lake rather than out into it as it originally did. So I'm going to show you why that is. All right, here's downtown Chicago in 1820, and you can see here there are some spots where the artist indicated that the banks of the river are not very well defined. That's maybe where the Clark Street Bridge is today. It looks a lot different. The city grew rapidly around the river. In 1868, we had the busiest port in the world on the river. So the river was a transportation hub. The city began work on a sewer system in the 1850s. This map shows the beginnings of that sewer system, and that would actually become the first comprehensive sewer system in the US. The Chicago sewer system was originally designed to do two things: to drain rainwater straight into the river and to carry sanitary sewage from homes and businesses straight into the river. Now, why would you put raw sewage right into the river? Well, at the time, wastewater treatment technology didn't exist, so their best bet was to put it in the river and dilute it and kind of hope for the best. And you can imagine that that caused some problems, and we will come back to that in a minute. This illustration shows the rivers as they originally were, draining out into Lake Michigan. And of course, when it rained, these rivers flowing through this flat landscape would spread out and flood a wide area. That's where the city was built, around the river. The sewers provided drainage. They also polluted the river and flowed out into the lake, releasing pollution into the lake. Now, our region's water supply source is Lake Michigan, so I think you can probably see the problem here. The river was threatening the water supply source. This is the City of Chicago Department of Water Management water intake structure today. This is the Deaver Intake crib. This is some video I shot from one of our boats. Again, this is not an MWRD facility, but this is where a lot of the region's water comes from, these structures like this out on the lake. This one is about, it's a couple miles offshore, just north of Navy Pier. Now, just west of Chicago, there is what's called a watershed boundary. Now, you all, I believe, are in Westchester, so you're actually on the other side of this watershed boundary, just to orient yourself geographically here. Watershed boundary is just a high point in the landscape where water flows downhill on either side of it. This particular watershed boundary here is actually a major one in North American drainage. The Great Lakes all drain out the St. Lawrence River to the Atlantic Ocean. The Mississippi River drains south to the Gulf of Mexico, and Chicago is right on the boundary between those two major watersheds. Now, in that illustration I showed you, I exaggerated that hill quite a bit. There's really not anything like that kind of hill or mountain or slope in the Chicago area. There is a hill there, though. And I live in Oak Park, and near my house at the intersection of Ridgeland and North Avenue, if you look at this topographic map, you can see evidence of that watershed divide. The elevation on North Avenue goes from 620 up to 641 and then back down to 635 over the course of a few blocks. So that is a hill. And I've got some video of it here. This is what counts as a hill in the Chicago area. We're looking east down North Avenue toward Lake Michigan. So a few blocks west of this location, the hill slopes down the other way. So this is the point where the water historically drained into those two major watersheds. All right, so we've got flooding in the city. Even with the sewer system, the flooding was still a problem. We have pollution threatening our region's water supply. The MWRD was founded in 1889 to address both of those problems by excavating a canal across that watershed divide and connecting the south branch of the Chicago River to a point on the Des Plaines River in Lockport, Illinois, that's lower in elevation. It's about 37 feet lower. So you can see how this works. The lake now flows in at the mouth of the river and downhill just by gravity to the Des Plaines River across that watershed divide. So that's how you reverse a river there. This map shows the rivers before construction of the canal. And this is after construction of the Sanitarian and Ship Canal, the Calumet Sag Channel, and the North Shore Channel, which together make up the Chicago area waterway system today. Now, it wasn't as easy as just scooping some dirt out of the way to cut a canal across that watershed boundary. There's actually a layer of limestone close to the surface in our region. And so to excavate through that layer of limestone, we had to use explosives to break up the rock and cantilevered cranes that you can see here in the background to lift the broken rock out of the channel. At the time, this was the largest channel in the world. Nothing like this had ever been built. And our chief engineer on this project went on to work on the Panama Canal a few years later. That photo is one of over 10,000 glass plate negatives that we have that document some of our early work and history. And we're in the process of producing high resolution scans of these, and we're putting them on social media. So if you're interested in seeing more of these, I encourage you to check us out on social media. So on January 2nd, 1900, water was first turned into the Sanitarian Ship Canal. This is water flowing from the south branch of the Chicago River over an artificial dam down into the newly completed canal. This is the Sanitarian Ship Canal today. We're looking northeast toward downtown. This is the North Shore Channel. We're looking south toward downtown Chicago. And in this view, you can see that some of the over 8,000 acres of land that we make available for public use as parks and green space. There's miles and miles of parks along our canals. This is the confluence or meeting point of the Sanitarian Ship Canal and the Calumet Sag Channel. And that structure there in the middle is a side stream elevated pool aeration or SEPA station. We have 5 of these on the Calumet River system, and they're designed to improve water quality by aerating the water, and they work by pumping the water up out of the channel into a pool and then letting it flow over an artificial waterfall structure. You can also see the Des Plaines River on the far left here, and also visible in this shot are 2 great trails, Centennial Trail and the Calsag Trail. These run along our property along the channels. And finally, that little channel you can see there is the I&M Canal, which was an earlier navigation canal that predated the Sanitarian Ship Canal. At the downstream end of the waterway system, there's a 37-foot elevation difference between the canal and the Des Plaines River that it's flowing into. So this is at Lockport, Illinois. We've used this elevation difference to generate hydroelectricity since 1907 at our Lockport Powerhouse, which is the building you see there with the red roof. We originally built our own electric transmission system to carry electricity into the city. Today we sell electricity back to the electric grid, and we make about $1 million a year on that electricity. Because the waterway system flows through so much of our region, it allows for barge transportation to be used to transport bulk materials. Barges are an economical and an environmentally sound way to move large quantities of heavy stuff. This is 2 barges here. One barge can hold 140 truckloads of cargo, and that's a ton of trucks to have off the highways, Barges are also they're also a more efficient way to move 1 ton of cargo than trains or trucks or other methods of transportation. So there's air quality and carbon footprint benefits to using barges. So the waterway system worked great. It protected the lake from pollution. It provided drainage for our region, and the city continued to grow. But when you're looking at this picture of Chicago in 1910 with over 2 million people, I want you to remember that sewer system I talked about earlier. Every single one of these buildings was connected to a sewer that was draining raw sewage right into the river that you see here. So you can imagine what that looked like. This is the 39th Street sewer, which discharged into Bubbly Creek, a small tributary to the south branch of the Chicago River. Here's another view of Bubbly Creek. So this is the result of raw sewage being emptied right into the river. This is how it looked. Now I'm going to show you a picture I took of Bubbly Creek a couple years ago, and it looks a lot different. The difference is that today sewage comes to our wastewater treatment plants to be cleaned before the clean water is released to the river. I mentioned earlier that the technology to clean sewage didn't exist when the sewer system was originally built. Well, we actually built pilot plants where we prototyped and test drove technologies to clean wastewater. This is one of those pilot plants that was actually on the 39th Street sewer. We have technical reports from the early 20th century that describe the results of these studies. So once we figured out how to clean the water, we also had to get it to our plants to be cleaned. You'll recall the sewers were all emptying right into the river. We had to divert that water to our plants using a system of what are called intercepting sewers that intercept the flow of the water and bring it to our plants to be cleaned. Our intercepting sewers are as large as 27 feet in diameter. This is construction of one in the 1930s. Today we have 7 treatment plants. We have hundreds of miles of sewers. And we treat an average of 1.5 billion gallons of sewage a day. Our Stickney water reclamation plant is our largest, and it's actually one of the largest sewage treatment plants in the world. We can treat a maximum of 1 million gallons a minute at our Stickney plant. That is a lot of water. I'm going to talk you through the process here, and then I'll show you some of this firsthand. So when the water gets to us, it's been flowing downhill through those intercepting sewers, downhill by gravity. So they're at a slight angle, and the water is 40 to 50 feet underground. So we need to pump it up to the surface to clean it. Before we let the water into our pumps, though, we need to remove any debris that's washed down the sewer system. So we send the water through what are called coarse screens, and they're basically like a metal fence that catch large debris. Over the years, we've removed some interesting things: car wheels, more than one bowling ball, lots of these little super balls, bouncy balls. One time a few years ago, we removed 2 live opossums, and we were able to safely remove them, and they lived happily ever after on the grounds of the plant. And people ask, yes, we sometimes even find money. And I recently talked to a guy who claims that he found a $100 bill on the screens at one of our plants. I believe him. I believe this guy. So from there, the water, after we removed all that debris, we pumped the water up to the surface, and from here it actually flows by gravity through the plant. So the idea is to only pump the water once and then kind of let it flow through. So the first step is aerated grit tanks, where we add air to the water that removes rocks, gravel, and sand that could be abrasive to the rest of the plant. So by adding air, it allows all that material to sink to the bottom of the tank, and it's removed and sent to a landfill. Next, the water goes into primary tanks. And now in primary treatment, the water sits still, and any organic matter that's mixed in with the water sinks to the bottom, and that's removed and goes to a separate solids process. Meanwhile, fats, oils, grease, and plastic floats to the top, and that's scraped off, removed, and sent to a landfill. Solids process is over in a different part of the plant. I'll talk about that more later. In primary treatment, just by letting the water sit still, we can remove 70 to 80% of the solids from the water. After that, the water goes on to secondary treatment, which consists of two parts, aeration tanks and final settling tanks. The aeration tanks are just like a fish aquarium. If you've seen bubbles going into a fish tank like this, that's done to provide dissolved oxygen for the fish to breathe with their gills out of the water. In the case of a sewage treatment plant, we add dissolved oxygen, we aerate the water with air bubbles to make the conditions just right for beneficial bacteria that help us clean the water. Now, I'm going to talk you through how this process works, but in order to explain it, I will have to show you a highly technical diagram. So this might look a little bit daunting at first, but bear with me, I will explain it. All right, there we go. Here's my technical diagram. This is water coming in after the primary tanks. It flows into the secondary aeration tank. Notice here we have suspended solids, which are the little floaty chunks. We have dissolved solids, the pollution in the water, the sort of general background color. We also have a mix of microbes. We have beneficial bacteria that are harmless, and they are just here to eat the pollutants out of the water. We also have pathogens or germs, disease-causing organisms, and you can figure out which of those is which here. So let's add some air to the water. Now, the beneficial bacteria are aerobic organisms, and they actually thrive in the presence of oxygen. They start to reproduce. They start to consume the pollutants from the water. So they're becoming more numerous, and the water is getting cleaner. You can see the background color is getting a little bit better here. Now the water flows through these aeration tanks like a river, so we're kind of flowing along, and as we're getting toward the end of the tank here, the water is much cleaner. You can see we got lots of these happy beneficial bacteria. But what about the pathogens or germs? Well, they tend to be anaerobic organisms, meaning they thrive in the absence of oxygen, and in some cases oxygen is actually toxic to them. So they're in this oxygen-rich environment. They're getting outcompeted for food, and what actually happens is they tend to die off. And we have a microbiology lab where we take samples and we confirm that this is occurring. All right, so now we're at the end of the aeration tank. Got clean water and happy bacteria. But if you looked at this water in a cup, it would look super cloudy. It's not clean yet. The bacteria that we set up our plants to create the best conditions for have a behavior called flocculation. That's our vocabulary word for today. What happens is they run out of food and they go dormant. And when they go dormant, they form these little clumps or flock particles. Once they've formed clumps like this, they're able to sink to the bottom. So now we've got clean water on the top and we got a bunch of beneficial bacteria on the bottom. So from here we let just the top inch or so of water flow out of this tank, and we send 95% of the beneficial bacteria back around to the beginning of the aeration tank to work again. 5% are sent to that solids process, and the clean water flows off the top of the tank. So let me show you around some of this stuff and you can see what it looks like here. This is two intercepting sewers flowing into our Stickney plant. This is the 17-foot west side number 1. This is the Salt Creek interceptor. It's an 8-foot sewer. So this is raw sewage flowing into the plant. This material is something we are providing for some national COVID studies that we participate in. They're doing COVID surveillance on wastewater coming into our plants. So we provide some of that material. This is an example of a place that you would never get to go on an in-person tour. So enjoy the view here. So you guys remember the screens? This is where we would remove $100 bills, opossums, bowling balls. In reality, it's a lot of flushable wipes like this. And in the fall, we get a lot of leaves here. After that, we pump the water up to the surface. These are some of the pumps at our Stickney plant. Notice that they are well below ground level. They're down at the level of the sewer. Behind my head here are soundproof enclosures that hold the blowers that we use to provide air for the aerated grit tanks, a little bit of air for that, but mainly for that biological process that we just saw. Speaking of the aerated grit tanks, this is one of those. So we're adding air to the water. We are removing rocks, sand, and gravel that sink to the bottom here. After that, the water goes to primary tanks, and here the idea is to let the water sit very still. Notice how slowly this board is moving here. This is moving along the top surface of the water, and it's scraping the fats, oils, grease, and plastic down to one end of the tank. All this is sent to landfill. Meanwhile, you can't see it, but at the bottom of the tank, we're scraping any organic solids mixed in with the water, and those are being sent to a solids process. This is the water flowing out of primary treatment. I want you to notice how clear that is. It's pretty clear. We've removed 70 to 80% of the pollutants, but the water is not clean yet. I just want you to make a mental note of that, though, because we're going to come back to this in a second. The solids go through a whole separate process, including anaerobic digesters, where they're heated, and there's another biological process that produces biogas that we use to heat and cool our plants. That process in the digesters also breaks down the solids, so they're now designated by the US EPA to be biosolids, and they can be used for landscaping as a soil amendment. The biosolids undergo additional treatment, including centrifuges, which kind of spin them. They work like a spin cycle on a washing machine to dry them out. And they're also brought by train to a solids management area that's near our Stickney plant. It's pretty cool that we have our own train line to carry these biosolids there. At the solids management area, one thing we do with the biosolids is produce a premium compost product where they're co-composted with wood chips. Our biosolids and compost are in use throughout the region for landscaping at golf courses and parks, including Maggie Daley Park in downtown Chicago. All right, back to the water. So we've come out of primary treatment. The water flows into these secondary aeration tanks. You can see the aeration is occurring here. This is our Stickney plant, and you can see there is a lot of tanks. These are 4-pass tanks, so the water flows through them like a river, but it kind of zigzags 4 times through them before flowing on to the final settling tanks, which are the circular tanks here. There's an equal area of aeration tanks on the other side of that tree line. So we've got tons of surface area of aeration at our Stickney plant. All right, I think you're looking at all this churning sewage, and I know what you're hoping for. You're wishing that someone would put a camera underwater so you could see exactly what it looks like under this, right? If not, I apologize, but we're going to take a look at it here. So we're looking at the view inside an aeration tank. Now what's interesting here is that this water is opaque, right? You can't see through it. Remember the water flowing out of the primary tank, though, was pretty clear. So why is the water in the next step of our process harder to see through? It looks dirtier. Well, this is because we have saturated the water with those smiley face beneficial bacteria that are helping us clean it. We test the water at all stages of the process. This is a lab where we are testing actually influent, so water flowing into one of our plants. We actually test water upstream of our plants at industrial dischargers before they release their water to the sewer system to make sure they don't send us anything they're not supposed to. And then we check it up. We check up on the water as it goes through the process, And then most important of all, we check the water before we release it to the river. We have permits with the state of Illinois that define very specific parameters that we have to meet. So we don't just clean the water to some random amount that seems clean enough for us and then release it. No, we have very specific targets to hit before we release it. In our microbiology lab, we check up on the biological process that's so important for us to clean the water to meet the requirements of our permits. We can learn a lot about what's going on in the plant by looking at what's living in it. So this is an amoeba. You can see it moves slowly. They do well when the water is very polluted, when they have lots of food, and they don't do as well once the water gets cleaner. This is a flagellate here. Same deal with this guy. They eat a lot of the same material that our beneficial bacteria eat, and so but they reproduce more slowly, so they get outcompeted as the water flows through the aeration tank. So if we see either of those later on in the tank as it's flowing through the aeration tank, we know that something's out of adjustment. These are the beneficial bacteria here, and you can see them moving around here. They're in their active state of consuming pollutants from the water. They have plenty of food and plenty of dissolved oxygen. They make up by far the majority of the organisms in the aeration tank, but there's sort of a food chain that develops with other organisms that prey on them, like this guy. This is a free-swimming ciliate. The word cilia comes from the Latin word for eyelash, and you can see it has these eyelash-like structures here that it swims around with. They eat dispersed bacteria that has not yet formed those flock particles, which is our vocabulary word for today. Speaking of which, here's a flock particle here, and these are crawling ciliates, which crawl around on already formed flock particles, and they feed on delicious dormant bacteria. So we like to see, when we see these crawling ciliates, it's a sign that we have good flock formation. Another sign of good flock formation is stalked ciliates, and that's this guy here. It has a stem like a plant, kind of, in this head-like structure, and it feeds on any remaining dispersed bacteria and sweeps them into its head. So they do some kind of final cleanup work for us. Finally, this is the king of the jungle here, the apex predator of our treatment process, the tardigrade or water bear. It has 4 pairs of legs, and it prowls around the tank and feeds on some of those other higher organisms. Tardigrades are sensitive to ammonia, which is one of our permitted parameters. So it's something that we're trying to reduce in the water. So when we see them, we know we're doing well in regard to ammonia, so we like to see them. This is a final settling tank here. So this is where those flock particles are allowed to sink to the bottom, and the top inch or so of the water is allowed to flow out of the tank. When the water enters from the aeration tank, it's all stirred up and the particles are all mixed in. Once the water sits still and the particles have a chance to settle, it becomes very clear. This water looks dark here because it's a deep tank. You're seeing deep down into this clear water. I think you can probably see here we've got like a kind of sandy, grainy appearance to the water, and that is exactly what we want to see in this final settling tank. It's working as it should. Here's an underwater view. So we've got particles here, clear water here. So from there, at our O'Brien plant, our permit requires us to use ultraviolet light to disinfect the water before it's released to the river. And we do that with these huge arrays of ultraviolet light bulbs. At our Calumet plant and some of our other plants, we use a chlorination dechlorination process to do the same thing. And in that process, the water flows through an array of, it's called a contact chamber. It's kind of like a maze-like array. And after that, the chlorine is chemically removed from the water before it's released to the river. This is the outfall where the water leaves one of our plants. This is our Egan plant's outfall. It flows into Salt Creek. You can see here we've got some folks fishing in the water. One of the criteria that our standards look at is that the water needs to be able to support aquatic life. And you can see here that we've got this guy catches a bass here, which is pretty cool. So that's the water flowing right out of our plant. It's been cleaned up, and they've got a thriving fish population there. So that was our whirlwind tour of wastewater treatment. I'm going to look and see if we've got anyone in the chat. Ryan, do we have any questions?
Not yet.
I'm explaining everything really well, apparently.
Oh, one just came in. When the river was initially reversed, did the communities downstream have any complaints?
Yes. Not only did St. Louis complain, they filed a lawsuit. I don't know all of the details of the intrigue around that, but so at the time, you'll recall when the river was reversed, we were not treating wastewater. So it was raw sewage going right into the river, and it was going downstream. Anyway, St. Louis filed a lawsuit, and in maybe a sort of old school Chicago way, they kind of went forward with it anyway. And we ended up with the river reversed, and it ended up just kind of moving forward and taking some momentum. Soon after the reversal of the river, we began building our wastewater treatment plants, and we were really ahead of the rest of the country and even the world in developing this technology and implementing it. So it's pretty quick before the water that was going to St. Louis was cleaned up. But yeah, there were objections to that. Yeah, if anyone else has questions, put them in the chat, and I'll try to get to them. All right, so this is a final tank here. Now I'm going to talk to you about the Tunnel and Reservoir Plan, or Deep Tunnel. So you'll recall the combined sewer system originally went straight into the river, and then we built a system of intercepting sewers to carry it to our plants to be cleaned. Now there are some communities, including Westchester actually, where there's a more modern way of building sewer systems, which is called a separate sewer system. In that system, storm sewers carry rainwater and stormwater right into the river, and a separate set of sanitary sewers brings the water to wastewater treatment plants. In this map here, you can see the breakdown of how that looks. Yeah, I see Westchester there. So you guys are in the white area, separate area. Now the Tunnel and Reservoir Plan, or TARP, was designed specifically for the combined sewer area. So I'm going to show you why. When we get really heavy rains, we get more water entering that sewer that is carrying rainwater and sewage to our treatment plants. So the flow increases a lot, and we can't clean the water quickly enough. Even with the largest sewage treatment plant in the world, we cannot clean the water quickly enough. So what happens is the sewers are allowed to follow their original course and overflow to the river. And that's bad for two reasons. First, it's adding extra water to the river, which is increasing the danger of flooding. And second, of course, it's polluting the river. By the 1950s, this was happening about 100 days a year on average. The Tunnel and Reservoir Plan was designed to catch that water in a system of huge tunnels and to carry it to gigantic reservoirs. And the idea of this system is to hold the water here until after the rain passes, and then pump it back up to the plants to be cleaned. So you can see here we got 4 main tunnel systems. They follow the rivers that they protect, and they're connected to the sewer systems with drop shafts. They flow to 3 huge reservoirs. This is a drop shaft here. A drop shaft is really just like a hole in the ground that Water from the sewer system falls down into the tunnel. They're divided in half so air can exit the tunnels and the drop shaft as the water flows in. That's important because you don't want to entrap air in the tunnel system. We have 110 miles of tunnels. Our Majewski Reservoir near O'Hare Airport holds 300 million gallons. Thornton Reservoir on the Calumet system has a capacity of 7.9 billion gallons. Our McCook Reservoir is so huge that we are completing it in 2 stages. The first half, which has a capacity of 3.5 billion gallons, is in operation now. When the second half is completed, it'll have a capacity of 10 billion gallons, and it's going to be about a mile long. Here's a view of it with water in it. The first half is holding 3.5 billion gallons of combined sewage that would have otherwise gotten into the river. When complete, TARP will have a final capacity of 17.5 billion gallons. One way to visualize that is 4,600 gallons for every single person in its service area. So if you have a family of 4 here, these are 4,000 gallon trucks here. Each of those gets their own truckload of storage capacity. All right, so TARP is really huge, but the question is, does it work, or is it working? Well, we've been monitoring water quality since the early 1970s. So we have a huge data set of water quality information. And in fact, the Chicago River is one of the most scientifically studied rivers in the world, thanks to our work. This is one of our field technicians removing a water quality monitoring device on the river. You can see it happens year round. There's some snow on the side of the river here. I took that picture and I think I was standing on the other side of the railing actually. Here's another view. This is a water quality sampling device being removed on Bubbly Creek. A lot of our water quality data is available online in our online water quality data mapping tool, which you can get to through this URL here or our website, MWRD.org. Another thing we do, besides looking at the quality of the water itself, is we look at what lives in the water. And so we've been doing biological monitoring, including electrofishing, since the early 1970s. So we've got a data set of the biological health of the river going back for decades. One final note of final indication of the success of the deep tunnel system is the other cities around the world that are building similar systems. So this concept was developed for the Chicago region, and it's now being used to protect rivers in cities around the world, which I think is pretty cool. All right, let's take a look at some tunnels here. I see the time here. I want to allow a little bit of time for Q&A at the end here. Keep the questions coming in the comments, and I'll circle back to them in a second. So when I go into the deep tunnel system, as a public affairs specialist, I'm going there to shoot photos and video to document the work. And the way we get in there is by being lowered by a crane down a 300-foot deep hole in the ground. And we're in a cage here. This particular time I had my phone with me, and I put it down at on the floor of the cage and got this really cool video of the view looking down into the tunnel. These tunnels that we'll see are tunnels under construction. These are construction areas on connecting tunnels. These are not live tunnels. A live tunnel would be a very dangerous place to be. So the Tunnel and Reservoir Plan was built in sections, and pieces of it were put into operation as they were completed. So the big long stretches of tunnels were completed first and were put in operation. Work was going on the reservoirs, and then we had to connect the tunnels in operation to the reservoirs. And so to do that, we built these connecting tunnels. This is excavation work through limestone for the Des Plaines inflow tunnel. So the tunnels were excavated through limestone, and then we poured a concrete liner using this movable concrete liner form. The liner provides a layer of sealant in the tunnel, and it gives it a smooth interior surface. The longer stretches of the tunnels were excavation work began in 1976, and we used tunnel boring machines to excavate those. At the time, this was brand new technology that was first used at scale on the Deep Tunnel project. The tunnel boring machines are now the standard way that you would dig a long tunnel anywhere in the world today. And they work by continuously cutting through the rock, and the rock, as it's cut, is carted out the back of the machine, and they're super efficient. In fact, our early projections, we had to budget and schedule construction work on the early segments of the tunnels, and we're using these things that hadn't been used anywhere previously on a big project, and they were way more efficient than we expected. So we ended up coming in ahead of schedule and under budget for a lot of the early contracts on excavation of the tunnels. All right, here's the big explosion part of our tour. This is excavation at our Thornton Reservoir. Now, I practiced this virtual tour with my 11-year-old son, and he told me that the one thing that I could improve in my overall presentation was at this point in the tour, I should go like that. I kind of missed the timing there, to make it look like I broke the rock. So that's about a 100-foot rock face there at our Thornton Reservoir. We partner with commercial quarry operators to excavate these huge tarp reservoirs. And this is a great way to economically excavate such a huge thing as McCook Reservoir. It's going to be about a mile long, about 300 feet deep. That is a lot of rock. Commercial quarry operators are experts at mining rock, and they have an economic use for it. And we want the hole in the ground after the rock has been dug out for our use to hold this combined sewage. This is water flowing into McCook Reservoir for the first time in 2018. That's a 33-foot diameter tunnel there. There's a lot of water flowing in here. These blocks here are there to diffuse the kinetic energy of water flowing into the tunnel. These are solar-powered aerators that are there to aerate the top layer of water in the reservoir, which helps to reduce odors from it. You can see it gets moving pretty fast there. This is a time lapse of stage 1 of McCook Reservoir filling over the course of about 24 hours. So that's that same 33-foot diameter tunnel, and we're going to watch this water go right up. 3.5 billion gallons of combined sewage here. So again, all of this water is captured here. This would have all gone into the river previously. This is all captured here, and it was all pumped back to our Stickney plant in this case and cleaned using that process we just saw. All right, let's take a look at some electrofishing real quick here. This is one of our monitoring and research boats on the south branch of the Chicago River, and this is Tom, one of our biologists, driving the electrofishing boat. The electrofishing boat works by electrifying the water around it using these anodes here. The electricity stuns fish in the water. It doesn't kill them, it just stuns them, and once the fish are stunned, they float to the surface. Our field technicians are ready to scoop them up in nets, and then they're held in a wet well on the electrofishing boat and then brought back to our larger research vessel where the fish are weighed, measured, identified, and released back to the river. I mentioned earlier, we have fish data going back to the early 1970s, and it's pretty incredible to look at that data set and to see the improvement in the fish population in the river. Just to give you one example, on Toohey Avenue on the North Shore Channel in the early 70s, we would fish for an hour in the Electrofishing Boat, and we would catch 5 fish. So they would, that's it. They bring 5 fish back and weigh them, measure them, identify them, and toss them back in the river. Today, we go back to that same location and we get around 300 fish. So there's just been an incredible improvement in the fish population. As the Stormwater Management Authority for Cook County, we have flood control and green infrastructure projects all across the county. So these are all things that they range from large flood control reservoirs like Addison Creek Reservoir here under construction to green alleys like this small neighborhood green alley in Berwyn. So we've got a giant range of projects that I didn't really discuss here, but there's a lot of great partnerships. One really cool partnership we're involved in the city of Chicago, it's called Space to Grow. And in that program, we fund rebuilding Chicago public schoolyards with green infrastructure. Green infrastructure is a way to hold rainwater where it falls so that it can't contribute to sewer backups or sewer overflows. This is a before picture of Davis Elementary School, and you can see there's some pooling water here in front of the school, which is an indication that the ground isn't absorbing much water. So when it rains here, this property is probably sending a bunch of water into the sewer system, which can contribute to sewer backups in the neighborhood. So it's not great from a stormwater perspective. The other side of it is this is the playground for the kids who go to this school. And from the kids' perspective, this also doesn't look like a great playground. So when we fund rebuilding these schoolyards, we look at it from both sides of the picture. And you can see here that today Davis Elementary School has a great playground structure, but these are also pervious surfaces that allow rainwater to soak in, and it absorbs rainwater and keeps it out of the sewer system. There's an educational component to Space to Grow too. This is some students participating in a planting event at the school. Our Green Neighbor Guide has information that individuals can use to put in green infrastructure on their own property. There's some simple things you can do: disconnecting downspouts, installing rain barrels. We have a great price on rain barrels on our website, MWRD.org. Pervious pavement is a way to pave an area that allows water to soak in. Rain gardens are a type of landscaping that allows rainwater to soak into the landscape much more than grass would. Green roofs hold rainwater on the roof of a structure. And native landscaping is another way to help absorb rainwater. Native plants, like you see here, absorb more rainwater than grass, but they also have really good root structure. And in this case, this is a stream bank stabilization project that we did in North Lake. And so after we stabilized the banks of Addison Creek here, we had it planted with these native plants because they have great root structure that really help to hold the landscape together there. Trees also absorb lots of rainwater. In our Restore the Canopy program, we have distributed over 100,000 native trees, tree saplings in the area over the past several years, and we continue that program today. You can find information about that at our website, MWRD.org. All right, here's a little sales pitch here. We have over 150 job titles at the Water Reclamation District. They're listed here. If you're interested in the work that we do, I encourage you to go to our website, MWRD.org, and check out the job listings. We have a civil service hiring process. So the way it works is you register your interest for a particular job title, and then you're notified when we are administering the exam for that job. As a government agency, we are governed by a 9-member elected board of commissioners. Our board meets regularly, and our meeting schedule is at our website, MWRD.org. Our board, they love to hear from the public, and they welcome public comment. So if you're interested in the work that we do, I encourage you to check out our board meeting schedule. All right. It's the end of the formal tour here. I'm going to take a look at the questions and see what you guys got here. Okay, so someone says, I live close to a quarry that is used for creek flooding. Would this water be clean before going back into the creek? Okay, I'm not sure exactly where you live, but that is probably an example of one of those, one of these projects. And that's probably a structure that's really, it's a passive structure that's designed to take overflow from the creek, so to detain some of the water that would have otherwise caused flooding in the area. And then the way that those work is the water is usually just, it overflows from the creek, it sits there in the reservoir, and then after the storm passes, we pump the water back into the creek where it came from. So no, that water would not be cleaned. Anyone else got any questions? Ryan, you got any questions from the YouTube stream?
Yeah, but actually, before I do that, someone just came up on the chat. Please explain the Addison Creek project, as it sounds like Westchester will benefit. Addison Creek does run through our town.
Let me take a look at that. Yeah, we've got a fact sheet about that. I'm not sure about the engineering on that one. Yeah, Westchester is a benefiting community on that project. So that is going to be a huge project, and we've been here. I'm gonna put a link to the fact sheet in the chat so that you can see it here. You can find out all about it. I've been doing drone flights there to document the excavation, and it's a huge reservoir. So there's kind of two parts to it. There is the reservoir that's there to detain the floodwaters, and then we're also doing upstream of it improvements on the channel to kind of help the water move quickly through and get to the input to the reservoir. So it's gonna, yeah, the fact sheet says here, it's gonna benefit approximately 2,200 structures along Addison Creek. So yeah, Westchester will benefit from that. It's a big one. We got anything else?
Yes, so we had one from the live stream, a few of them. Does electrofishing help at all with identifying any invasive or non-native species?
Oh yeah, definitely, and that's how those fish are identified. We haven't caught any Asian carp, if that's what the questioner is wondering about, but there's certainly lots of non-native species, and there's my wife is a fish biologist, so you could call it like if it's a non-native species that's not causing terrible problems, you just call it a non-native. If it's something that's causing a lot of problems, then it becomes an invasive species. So yeah, that's certainly the way that you would identify those. And when I mentioned that the fish population number is growing, certainly some of those are non-native fish.
Do non-natives get thrown back in, or are they?
Oh yeah, yeah. We're not. Yeah, I don't know if they have a protocol like if they did. I think if they caught like an Asian carp or something or some particularly nuisance species, they might not.
Someone had asked, you mentioned the Stickney being the big wastewater treatment plant, but where are the others located?
Pop quiz here. Let's see. Calumet plant is on 130th in the city of Chicago. Our O'Brien plant is on the North Shore Channel in Skokie. Our Kiri plant is just north of O'Hare Airport. I think it's in Des Plaines. Our Egan plant is in Schaumburg. Hanover Park plant is a little one that's in Hanover Park, kind of in the north west of the county. And our Lamont plant is in Lamont. Wow, I guess I knew that.
Oh, good job. um, I've got a quick question. So in the beginning, you had mentioned the watershed kind of being on Ridgeland and North Avenue. Do you know how far does it extend along Ridgeland, or like, do you know how far it extends? Is it down to like the Stickney plant? Because the reason I'm asking is I actually grew up on Ridgeland in Berwyn, and someone had told me something that it was called Ridgeland because that's where uh, the land divides. But the plant is pretty close to Ridgeland too in Stickney, so I was wondering if it extends
Yeah,
that far south.
it doesn't seem like it has that same hill once you get down into Berwyn. I've done that drive a million times down to our Stickney plant from my house. Um, the the like geological history of that spot that I showed at North and Ridgeland, there is a little ridge there, which is actually a sandbar because the Des Plaines River, which today flows to the Mississippi River, at one point flowed into Lake Michigan and it had like a sandbar there. And so that little hill that I showed the topographic map of was that historic sandbar. And by the time you get south down to like Berwyn, you're in the area where the Des Plaines had already kind of flowed out into Lake Michigan. But the watershed divide was still there. There was kind of an ambiguous area though, like actually right at where our Stickney plant is today. It was originally called Mud Lake, and it was a spot where the Native Americans would historically use to portage from the Chicago River. They would go across Mud Lake, and then they could get to the Des Plaines River because that was kind of their like highway system. They'd go around the Great Lakes, and then they could get to the Mississippi River system. And when it rained, and the whole area got flooded, that was actually great for them because they could just canoe across the water and they didn't have to carry their canoe.
Okay, that's very interesting. Well, thank you. That was my question. Let me just see. Yeah, it looks like, oh, got another one just came in the chat. Due to construction on my street, we have lost some trees. Should we be concerned about this?
Well, trees are a great way to soak up stormwater, and that's kind of the reason. That's why, as a water agency, that's why we are giving away trees. If they're on the village, or I'm not sure what. Yeah, I'm not sure what the background of that question is, but if it's like an empty lot and the trees were cut down to build construction, that's something that as the stormwater management authority for Cook County, we actually have an ordinance where there are requirements to make sure that if you build like say a Target or something, that there is sufficient stormwater detention measures taken. So basically, if we paved over all this prairie here, that water would have to go somewhere. And so we account for that in our stormwater ordinance. So that should have been accounted for if there was a major construction site in your area.
I would just like to point out that we had a dedication last week or 2 weeks ago for a native garden we had installed at the library. And MWRD was nice enough to give us 50 trees, red oaks, pin oaks, and bald cypresses. And we do still have some here at the library. So if anyone was interested in, planting a native tree, please stop by.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I didn't realize that we had done that.
Yeah, we a lot of them went during the program, but we still have a few left over, so I'd like to give them a good home.
Great.
So I think that's it. I don't think we have any more questions from the live stream. So thank you very much, Justin. This was a very interesting, engaging presentation. I never knew there was so much that goes on to keep our water safe and clean.
Well, thank you, everyone. I popped my email address there in the chat. It's brownj@mwrd.org. If you ever have any questions about anything related to what I just talked about, please shoot me an email and I'd be happy to answer your questions. Thanks for spending the time to take this tour with me.
Thank you so much, and you have a good evening.